So this is the very first session in this whole series of Azure Deep Dive series, and I'll be covering application security group. And we'll see what that is, what the feature is, how the feature functions, how we implement, how we deploy it, how we can monitor it if we want to, and then I'll provide some architectural guidance on how we can use it properly within Azure design. So, first of all, quick information about myself. My name is David Okeode. I'm a cloud security architect. I work at a company called Sophos. So you can see from the screen that I'm heavy into the Microsoft certification. I'm a triple MCSE in cloud platform and infrastructure, in productivity, and in mobility. I'm also an AWS solutions architect professional. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, VCP professional, Cisco, and a bunch of other certification and that. So let's get into this one. So to begin, um, let's talk about our network in Azure. So I'm sure that we're joining this session talking about application security groups. I'm sure that we already have some idea as to what networking is in Azure. Essentially, Microsoft has this huge network spread around multiple data centers globally. And what we can do, or what they've provided to us, is an ability to carve out our own private network from this massive network that they have. So this is a private network that's completely isolated from all the other networks, even though they may be running on the same hardware. It's completely software defined, so there's nobody running around data centers unplugging and plugging cables and doing all that stuff. You provision your network by making REST API calls to the Azure Fabric controller. And once we make that REST API call, that's submitted to the Fabric controller, which goes ahead and implements what we've submitted in software, and then we have a private network in Azure. So now, because what we're talking about today, we're talking about application security group, which is a feature of the network security group. So let's start from that and let's take it back from there. So in terms of what application security group is and how we can use that, one of the first things that we have to understand is how security works in an Azure Virtual Network. Security works in an Azure Virtual Network using a model called a shared responsibility model. What does that mean? What that simply means is this. What that means is when you have this private network carved out in Azure, the responsibility for securing that network lies not only with you, or only with Microsoft. It's something that you have to share together. So that's why it's called shared responsibility security model. So Microsoft have their own parts that they have to take care of when it comes to securing the network that you've deployed. And we have our own parts as consumers of this Microsoft platform, Azure platform, of what we need to configure and ensure that we have working correctly to take care of our own part. So looking at this, for example, there's a very nice security layer in Azure. I think this one is even a bit outdated. I think they have a much more updated one, but nevertheless, it gets the point across. So for example, you see that, right, you have the internet, you have Azure here, and then we have this distributed denial of service protection. And that's normal, right? Because, for example, currently in different offices or at home, we have a connection to the internet. Most likely, the ISP that we're connecting to has some form of distributed denial of service protection implemented. So whenever you're talking about protection against DDoS, you probably don't want that to get to your network and then you have to take care of that at your own network level. When it gets to that, that's probably too late. What you want is you want to handle that at the ISP level. So in this case of Azure, Microsoft, they had the ISP and they have deployed a very advanced high-tech DDoS protection. And that has a bunch of machine learning technologies integrated with that. and it's a very comprehensive one. Just more recently, they made it available that you can configure special protection using the same technology that they have for your virtual network. But that's beyond the scope of what we're discussing today. Then we have this endpoint, and then we have virtual network isolation, which what that means is Microsoft are responsible to ensure that even though my virtual network may be running on the same hardware as your virtual network, they are completely isolated from one another. That's Microsoft's responsibility to take care of. They take care of that and ensure that there's isolation between that. So they use a bunch of um, network virtualization technologies with software-defined networking to make that happen. Then if you move back a bit, then we have network security groups. So one of the things that I want to show you here, the reason why I'm putting this slide here is to show that the very first control that we can configure as consumers of the Azure platform, putting our virtual network in Azure, is this network security group. That's the very first point of control that we can have, is we can configure and say this traffic is allowed to talk to my virtual network. This traffic is not allowed to talk to my virtual network. This traffic is allowed to talk out of my virtual network. This traffic is not allowed to talk out of my virtual network. Or we can even use that to even configure subnet isolation and say, even within my virtual network, this traffic cannot allow to talk to one another. But it's all IP-based, network-based, which is what we're talking about today. What we're particularly talking about today, it's a feature of this network security group, the very first point of control, security control that we can configure as Azure consumers, so network security group. So that's what we're focusing on, and we're specifically focusing on application security group under that. Then we have network virtual appliances. You're talking about appliances like Sophos XG firewall and other different firewalls that may be out there. And then we have Azure deployment in there. So having that understanding, let's move on. So one of the main drives, or one of the things that Microsoft has been doing over this past year, between last year and this year, is they've been working hard to improve how network security group is managed in an Azure virtual network. So because when they first released this, it was okay, but then there was a bit of complaint in terms of it wasn't meeting like the requirements that people wanted it to meet. So what Microsoft did was they put a bit of effort in this and provided more features to help simplify management of network security groups in Azure. And at Microsoft Ignite last year, that was in September 2017, they announced these three new features of the network security group to make life easier for administrators, people that administer network security groups. So number one feature is there's something called the service tags. And we'll look at what that is in a bit more detail. And then we have application security groups, which is what we're talking about today, focusing on today. And then we have this thing called augmented network security groups. But the main thing to take out of this is that all these three features have been put in place to help us simplify management of our network security group, which is the very first point of security protection that we can configure as consumers of the Azure platform. Moving on, what's the timeline of how this has happened so far? So the timeline was in September 25th at Microsoft Ignite last year. Microsoft began by announcing these three new features. They announced the preview of these three new features. If I click on the link for that and get that open, so let's go. Let's that should open in a new tab, hopefully. Yeah, there we go. Oh, here we go. Here we go. So this was the announcement that came out where they announced we're announcing public preview of application security groups, service tags for network security groups, and augmented security rules for network security groups. And again, remember that all these three are geared towards one thing, simplifying the management of our network security groups. So then in January 9th, they announced the general availability, or GA, of the augmented security rules. And we'll talk about what that is in a minute. And then in a few days later, 15th of January, they announced the general availability of the service tags for network security groups. And then finally, just a few weeks ago, they announced the GA of the application security groups. So what are all these different features that we talked about? So first of all, let's start with augmented security, augmented security rules. Let's start with that first of all. So the very first thing to know about augmented, or to think when you think about augmented security rules, is that in the past, what used to happen is that if I wanted to configure a security rule in my NSG, I'm only limited to just one node or one IP address range. In other words, let's say I have three IP address ranges: 10.1.0.0 slash 16, 10.2.0.0 slash 16, 10.3.0.0 slash 16. And I want to create a security rule to say allow port 389 or 3389 to these three network ranges. For me to achieve that, I will need three separate security rules. So I will need to create the first one for the first IP range, the second one for the second IP range, the third one for the third IP range. So it has to be one to one essentially. So what that meant was that complexity grew really quickly, especially for people that were following a multi-VNet strategy in Azure where they have multiple VNets and they have a complex environment. The number of rules could grow very quickly. And um, complexity is an enemy of security, right? The more complex it is, the more difficult it is to manage. Now you have a bunch of different rules to look through. If you need to modify something, there's a bunch of rules to look through to modify. So that became very complex quickly to manage. And then to add to that, there is a limit to the number of rules that you can have. So if you have this huge, massive environment in Azure, and then you can only specify one to one when you're configuring your security rules, the network security group, it's very easy for a very large environment to hit that limit as to the number of rules that they could have in a security group. And we'll talk about what that was. So very easy for them to hit that. So I think at the moment, the number of rules is you can have how many? We'll have a look at that in a minute, what the number of rules are. So what augmented security rules, this feature, what it does is it allows us to specify multiple IP addresses or multiple IP address ranges within a single rule. Let me show you quickly what I'm referring to. So I'll go over to my Azure portal over here. And what I'll do is I'll create a new resource and I'll go on the networking and I'll specify network security group. And I'll call this test augmented role. Let me see if I can make that much larger for you. Is that better, guys? Is that better than what I was using before? Okay. So test augmented role, and I'll put it in a new resource group. Leave that in West Europe, and I'll go ahead and click create to that. So that creates my network security group. For me, that should not take so long to create. Deployment in progress, and I think it should complete within a few seconds because it's empty at the moment. It has absolutely nothing, no configuration in it. So let's go. Yep, there we go. It's completed. If I go to resource, I can go to my network security group now. Now, if I go under inbound security rules, what augmented security rules allow me to do is I can specify, for example, if I want the source to be an IP address. I'm no longer limited to just one IP address or one CIDR range here. I can have multiple. I can go 10.1.1.0/24, 10.1.2.0/24, whatever I want to configure, 10.2.0.0/16. I can carry on specifying. You say how many IP addresses or side of ranges can I specify in a network security group? That by default, that you can specify 2000 IPs here. Now that should be enough, right? So you can specify 2000 by default. If for some reason you're operating a very weird environment and you need more than 2000 definitions here, you can raise a support call with Microsoft and they'll raise that to 4000. So you can have up to 4000 definitions in your rules. And the same thing goes for port ranges. So I no longer have to specify just one port, port 22, and then create another rule for another port. I can specify port 22, port 3389, port whatever, port anything. And then once I'm specified that, I can go ahead and give it a name and say allow augmented rule, whatever. And okay, it does not like the underscore, I think. No, I think it should be okay with the underscore. I think it's the space that it does not like. Let's see. Okay, it's good. And then that's going to create my security rule for me. And you see when the rule is created is that you can see now I can have multiple definitions within a single rule. So that's augmented security rule. So that's what this provides to us. And as you can see in the example below here, you can have IP1, IP2, all the way to IP2000 or IP4000 if you raise a support call with Microsoft. So let's move on to the next one. Next one is network security group service tags. What service tags allows us to do. So what have we, so it's not an uncommon situation in Azure for certain organizations to go, we don't want to allow outbound traffic from our Azure virtual network to the internet. We don't want to allow that. But we have services that are running within a virtual network that needs to access Azure services like Azure, or what I call Azure public services, like Azure SQL, Azure Storage. But these services use public IP address ranges for Azure public services like SQL and storage and stuff like that. So they use public IP addresses. So how do you undo that? In the past, the only options for organizations to achieve this was to do whitelisting. What they needed to do was to download an XML file that contains a list of Azure data center IP addresses or high IP address ranges. And then they can use certain scripts to automate that whole process and then create a whitelist in network security group rules to say block every other IP except these IPs. Now, from what I described earlier, you can see where the problem is because again, you can get to the limit of network security groups very easily if you're using that method. And also that's just tedious to manage, which again is an enemy of security, the complexity. So what Microsoft decided to do was let's try to simplify this. This is what people want to do. They need to be able to access Azure public services without allowing access to the internet. So service tags are essentially monikers for Azure services. And what we mean by that is they're just like tags. You can specify, I want my network to be able to talk to Azure Storage. I want my network to be able to talk to Azure Storage in West Europe only without having to define the IP address list. Microsoft will be responsible for maintaining the IP address for each tag. All you need to do is specify the tag. So let's show a quick demo of that. I'll show you what that is. So again, I'll add another rule here. I'll call this name. I'll say test service tags rule. And for the source, you can see now that I have an option here. So I have any IP address and service tag. In the past, the only service tag that we had only two. We had internet and virtual network. I think we had Azure Load Balancer also. But now you can see these new services. I can just specify Azure Traffic Manager. I will need to know what the IP address ranges are for that. I can just select Azure Storage. I can specify Azure Storage, the particular region that I want. I can specify Azure SQL or Azure SQL, the particular region that I want. So you can see how this simplifies the management of your network security rules, because you can just specify this and go, that's the only thing I want to allow. Port 3246, or 3446, and I can just go 150. Okay, and that's going to create that. So that's service tag. So again, just a way to simplify that. So moving forward now, let's go back to our presentation. Now we're talking about application security groups, which is an interesting feature because what it allows us to do is to extend the concept of tagging to our application security group. So it allows us to extend that concept of tagging to that. And think of application security group as giving us the ability to group our virtual machines together based on the workload that they're running. So what that means is we're no longer limited to specifying IP to IP communication. We're no longer limited to saying this IP address can talk to the IP address, because IP address can change all the time depending on how you've deployed your workloads in Azure. And this allows you to be able to define much more simplified rules. So for example, look at this example to the right, where I can specify anything that's coming from web servers can talk to the application servers. Anything that's coming from the application servers can talk to database servers. And I don't need to go ahead and be trying to track what's the IP address for web servers, what's the IP address for application servers, what's the IP address for database servers. I'm putting that in. And then if I deploy a new database server and then the IP is different, then I have to go in and specify something else, right? All I need to do is, once I've configured this, is to ensure that whenever I deploy my virtual net machine, I tag them with the application security group, and that rule is going to apply to them. So you can see that the interesting aspect of that. So what that provides to us is security for dynamic workloads. So workloads that changes again as the IP address can change. Another thing that it provides to us is we can have a single policy for a virtual network. So we don't need to have different security groups where we have a different network security group for this one because it allows different IP addresses, and then to the other one because it allows different IP addresses. We can just create our policies based on this and just slap that policy on every single network interface, and that will apply across. So another good explanation that shows what this one looks like is, look at this. So this is a very nice scenario also. So we've specified the web application security group, app application ASG, and DB ASG. If I deploy new VMs, all I need to do is provision them with their tags and they automatically get the rule. And then this is an interesting thing because if you look at the top of this particular network security group, there's a rule that says block quarantine VMs. So think about a situation where there can be a security incident where a machine has been compromised on my network. What will I need to do to isolate that machine on my network? So I'll need to, if I were using IP addresses in my network security groups, I'll need to either go disconnect the network interface of that machine, shut down the machine, which again may hamper my investigation, or trying to be modifying and creating another rule at the top to say, okay, allow every other IP to talk to one another apart from this IP. But in this scenario, it makes it easier because you can create your application security group tag for quarantine VMs and have a rule that says anything that wants to talk to any VM that has this quarantine VMs tag, block it. So if a machine is compromised in your environment and you need to isolate it to do some more security investigation, all you need to do is slap on that machine the quarantine VMs tag. And once you slap that on that machine, instantly communication cannot go to that machine. So that makes your security response much more easy. So that's part of like a whole concept that's defined as adaptive security. Your security can adapt to the environment, and it's dynamic security. It's not just static security that you have to manually be moving things around. Just use tags to control that. So that's what application security groups provide to us. So That being said, with the explanation, let's go ahead and do some demonstrations on that. So I think that's probably it for like the slides. The thing that's left for us to do now is to do some demonstration and see how that works. So one of the first things that I would like to mention when we talk about application security group is this, is that unfortunately it's not been exposed in the UI yet. So we cannot configure it from the Azure portal. So you see that if I go to add a new rule, if I go to the source, where do I specify application security group here? There's no option to specify it from here. And if I go to destination range, there's no option to specify from here. So the reason for that is that it's not really been fully exposed in the Azure user interface yet. If we want to configure it, we need to use either PowerShell or the Azure ARM template, the HAM template, or the Azure CLI. We can use a programmatic method interacting with Azure portal using REST API, but not yet from the UI interface. So let's go ahead and actually um, do that here. So what I'll do is I'll bring up PowerShell here, and to start with, I'll log into my Azure environment, log in Azure RM account. Um, let's log into that. Make sure that put in my password. And it should show me, so I'm logged in now, so you can see I have only a single subscription. I'm using the Azure Pass subscription. So first of all, what are the PowerShell commandlets that are available for application security group? There's a new now called surprise application security group. So let's maximize this a bit. So if I just run this first one, which is get command, and show me anything that contains the noun application security group, and if I run that, it's going to show me that there are three new commands. There's a get command to get information about existing application security groups. There's a new command to create application security groups, and there's a remove command to remove application security group. Let's run the first one, which is just get application Azure RM application security group. If I run that, you can see that I have nothing at the moment. I have no application security group. Wait, let's expand this a bit. So I currently don't have any application security group. So what I'll do is we create one. Before I do that, I'll just run this bunch of lines to just store my variables. So these are just variable name that will define the name of the resource group that I want to create, the location for the resource group and for the resources that I'll be creating, and a bunch of other variables. So we'll talk about this when we get there. So I'll just run this to ensure that the variables are stored. Okay, so that's completed. So first thing I'll do is I'll create my resource group. So if I run that, new Azure RM resource group, that creates my resource group with the name ASG RG01. So I have my resource group created now. And if I go to the Azure portal to confirm, let's go back here. And if I go on the resource groups here, I have my resource group here, ASG RG01. If I bring that up, you can see that it's empty. So what I'll do now is I'll run the new Azure RM application security group command to create a new application security group. And this one, I'm going to give it a simple name. The name is stored in this variable called web ASG name. If I run that variable, so I'm creating an application security group with the name my ASG web servers. So every web server that I deploy, for example, I'm just going to slap this application security group tag on them, and they will yeah, sure. So Rohit asked the question, is it possible to share the script? Yeah. So what I'll do at the end of this is not only the script. If you want, I can share the presentation. I can put all of this on my GitHub account, and I'll share the link. So I'll share the link on Twitter. I'll share it I'll share it on LinkedIn. If you want, you can put your email address in. Well, don't put your email address in the chat window, because that's like cut me, because GDPR does not allow email addresses to be shared to be shared. So I
Mm-hmm.
can't share your email address with others. So so what you can do is if you follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, just drop me a private message with your email address if you want. I'll just post the link to you, no problems. Okay. So
Yeah,
what I'll
sure.
do is I'll run this to create my new web servers application security group. And let's run that. And it shouldn't take too long, and I should have that created. An application security group. Okay. Yeah, and that's done. So if I run the variable now, which is web ASG, and I press enter, you can see I have my new application security group. I'll create another one for management. So you can tell where I'm going here. Where I'm going here is I want to deploy two servers. And I don't want to use IP addresses to control who will be able to talk to what. I want to be able to create two servers to say, for the management server, allow the management port, which is RDP. For the web server, only allow port 80, which is for web, or port 80 and 443. And whenever I deploy a new web server, I don't need to go add them and update my network security group. No, I just need to add the tag for my web server application security group to it, and it instantly will get the rule. And if I create a new management server, just add the same tag for management servers to it, and it gets the rule to allow management access to it. So I'll create the one for management server now, and that should be done. So I'm putting it in the same resource group in the same location with a different name. So why this is creating, if I go back to the Azure portal and I refresh it, you can see that there's really nothing that's showing here because it's not really been fully exposed. But one of the things that I want you to notice here is there's this option here that says show hidden types. And what that means is there are some resources that are created and managed by the Azure infrastructure that are hidden. If you want to see them, you have to tick this checkbox. So if I tick on this checkbox, you can see here we go. So here are my application security groups that I created. You can see the um, Azure RM provider is Microsoft Network, and the resource type is application security group. So these are my application security groups that I just created. I can see them under my resource group. So that's a good way if you're doing some auditing. You want to have a quick look at what the application security groups that I have. You can either go on the PowerShell and run the get command that we saw earlier, get Azure RM application security group. And if I run that, it's going to show me the application security groups that I want. If I want to format that better, I can format it with format table, show me the name, and show me the location. And that shows me the application security groups that I have. So now that I have this security group, let's draw a picture here to show us what we're doing. So what I'll do is I have my lovely paint here. And what we've just done is we've just created two application security groups. I'll bring those up here. So let's go first one. And here we go. Application security group one, which is the management. And let's get the other one for web. So we'll have a picture, a diagram that will help us to relate to what we're doing in PowerShell because it makes things much more understandable. This is what we have at the moment. We've just created two application security groups in our resource group. What's the next thing that we need to do to get this to work? Next thing that we need to do is we need to create network security group that we're going to use those rules in. So here's what we want to do next. Let's have a picture of that before we do that. So what we want to do is we want to create a network security group. And the network security group will have two rules in it. It will have one rule that will essentially say allow anything from the internet, port 8443, to any server that I've tagged with this application security group tag. So that's the first thing that we're gonna do. And I'll also have another rule that will say allow anything from the internet port RDP to any server that I've tagged as ASG management service. So this is essentially what I want to do now. For me to be able to achieve that, the first thing that I need to do is I need to create the rules. And then after creating the rules, I need to add the rule to a new network security group. So let's go ahead and do that in PowerShell. So first thing, I create the web rule that will allow access to just anything that I've tagged. So you can see here, I've specified destination application security group for web.asg just ID. So if I run that, and that's completed now, and I can run the same thing for the management server, and that's done here also. So that's completed. And now I'll create a network security group and put my two rules in the network security group, essentially what we have on the picture or in the diagram. So if I run that, now that shouldn't take too long. I should have my network security group with those two rules in it. So yeah, and that's done. So what we have so far, sorry about that, what we have so far is we have this. What we can see on the screen is what we have. We have two application security groups, and then we have a network security group that we have used our application security group in the rules. Let's go see, can we see from the portal, from the Azure portal, what we've just done? If I refresh this resource group, I have my network security group there. If I go under my network security group, you'll notice that, look at that. This is not visible in the UI. So don't be confused if you create this and you go to the UI and you don't see anything there. According to Microsoft, they are working hard in the background to make this visible in the UI. But for now, if you create that, what you see is you just see empty destination. So there's nothing there. The destination is not there. So it's the same thing for this one. But if you want to actually see what's going on, you can use PowerShell. So PowerShell will show you exactly what's in that. So for example, if I say, just show me my network security group. Oh, sorry. No, that's not what I want to do. So if I do get Azure RM network security group, name of my network security group is NSG name. That's the variable that I've stored it in. And resource group name is RG. And here's my network security group and the rules that I have in it. So let's go up. Let's see. So these are the default ones. And if I go to, so that's allow VNet inbound, allow web all, for example, is the network security rule. You can see the source port is everything. Destination port is 18443. Source address is internet. Destination address is empty. Or you can see destination application security groups. I have my ASG web servers in there. So you can see it in PowerShell, but you cannot see it from the UI yet. Just be aware of that. So now that I've created that, let's begin to make sense of our network. So the next thing that I want to do is, if I bring up my diagrams, I want to create a new network. So I have this now. I want to create a new network, a new virtual network. And this new virtual network, let's get some nice diagram here to specify to us that we have a virtual network. So let's go virtual network here. So we have a virtual network. Let's go ahead and create that. And within this virtual network, what we want to do is we want to create a subnet within this virtual network. And then we'll put two virtual machines within the subnet. We'll tag one of them with ASG management servers. We'll tag one of them with ASG web servers. So that's what we want to do. So we have a virtual network. We want to create a subnet within the virtual network. Let's go ahead and do that now with PowerShell. So move on to the next one, create a new virtual network. So this side of creating a virtual network, obviously we can do that from the web portal. So virtual network should be created soon, and then we can add our subnet configuration. So we're just creating a single subnet within this virtual network. That shouldn't take long. So by the way, what we're doing is yeah, I'll show you that. So create subnet configuration, and that should be done now. After this is all done, let's go to the Azure portal. If I go under my resource group, under my ASG RG01 resource group, I should see my virtual network there now. So I can click on that again to see my application security groups. If I click on my virtual network, I have my virtual network. My virtual network should have one subnet within it. So that's fine. So now we have what we have on the screen. That's what we currently have. So let's move on now. So what we want to do is we want to create a bunch of IP addresses, public IP addresses that we'll use for our virtual machines, and some some VM configuration. So I'll run a bunch of that. Let's go back to our diagram and let's give a visual display of what we are doing now. So what we're doing is we have two public IP addresses that we're creating. So one of them will be for the web server, one of them will be for the management server, just two public IP addresses. So that's what we've created. We're yet to create the VMs. That's done. Let's go ahead. Now, the next thing that we do, so you can see here that we want to create a network interface, but our network interface is what we associate with our application security group. So in Azure, a network interface is a separate resource. So I'll show you what I mean by that in the picture in a minute. Let's run this command first to create a network interfaces. Here's what we just did now with that PowerShell command. What we've just done is we've created a network interface within this subnet, and the network interface, we've tagged it with ASG management service, which is our application security group ID. So that's what we've done. So that's what we've done here. And at the same time, if I paste that again, we've created another network interface, but in this case, we've tagged it with the web server application security group. So you can see how we're using our application security group that we created here. First thing that we do is after we've created them, we can begin to use them to tag our network interfaces as we create them, or we can begin to use them in our network security group. So this is what we have. We have no virtual machines yet, just network interfaces tagged with our application security group. That's what we have. So moving on to PowerShell again. So again, let's see from the portal what we created now. Let's go back on the resource groups. Let's go under our ASG01 resource group. Let's show that just to be conscious of what we've done. And you can see our two interfaces there. If I click on these interfaces here, you'll notice that there's no option where I can see which application security group this network interface is tagged with. I can see that from the UI here. But again, for now, if I go to PowerShell, we can view it in PowerShell. So we cannot see it from the UI. So if I go to PowerShell and if I just do, for example, web NIC, and that gets me my network interface, I can see under the IP configuration section, if I scroll down, there's a new section here for application security groups. And that's where I can see the tag that's been applied to this network interface. So the application security group is not actually tagging a virtual machine, it's actually tagging a network interface. So just be aware of that. So now I can begin to create my machine, which is much more straightforward. So all this ones is much more straightforward stuff. I'll just run all of them at once and specify a username and password for my virtual machine. And that should begin to deploy my VMs. So finally, yep, so that'll begin to deploy my VMs. Finally, what we now have here is I have my virtual machines that I'm deploying 2 of them. So virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2, and what I have is I have the first one, which is the web server, and then the other one, which is my management server. And they're associated with their network interfaces. Yep. And what I now, the final thing that I'll need to do afterwards is I'll need to ensure that my network security group is associated with this subnet, so that if any anybody wants to access this public IP, it's going to go through that network security group, which we check and say, well, you're not allowed to talk to MSG web servers, which is this one. So I'm no longer using IP address. This is much more easier to manage. As a security team, it's much more easier for you to define policies for roles than for you to design policies for IP addresses, because those change all the time. But if you have certain roles and all you do is you have governance policies around your machine deployment, to say whenever you deploy a machine that's running these processes and that processes this type of data, tag it with this, give it this tag, and therefore it's going to get all the policies. And what that means is that we can take the same policy and apply it across all networks and across everything. Does that make sense to you? Any question regarding so far? Because that's like the core of the demonstration. Now we'll just go into the final phase where we'll talk about limitations of application security group, and we'll talk about architecture guidance. Any questions before I move on to the final stage? You can put your questions in the chat window. Yeah, nice, right? Okay. Does that make sense to you though? Is it good? Much more clearer, is it? And Elish and Femi, are you good? Yeah, good. Okay. So we'll just wait. So this one will deploy very soon. Let's talk a bit and finalize this. Let's talk about the limitations of this. Limitations of application security group, because it does have certain limitations. And to me, there's a really big limitation that it has. The number one limitation that it has that I don't like at all is it's limited to a single virtual network. Ouch. That's a painful limitation, right? So, with everything that I've done, my guess would be Microsoft are will work to probably extend it. I can only use this for this virtual network. Sorry, let's get this. I can only use this for this virtual network. I cannot use that for if I have a multi-VNet strategy. I can't have this set of group of tags and use this across my entire environment. I have to create separate application security groups for separate VNet. So that's just, that's a bit of complexity for people that have multi-VNet. And then they don't cut across. So if you have MSG management servers in one VNet and you have VNet peering going between them, they don't cut across. So that's number one limitation, is it's limited to only one virtual network. The other thing that I want to mention is I've only tagged this with one application security group. Well, does that mean that I'm limited to just one? Sorry about that. Does that mean that I'm limited to just one application security group when it comes to tagging this? No, I'm not. I can tag this with, if I wanted to, the same machine, my web O1, I can tag it with another tag if I wanted to. No? Let's go back a bit. Okay, that's better. I can tag it with another tag up to a limit of 10. So I can have 10 tags, 10 application security group tags, not per network interface, per IP configuration of a network interface. So it's one of the things that I'm not sure if you notice when I ran the PowerShell command earlier that showed me this, is that the application security group is actually not just under the interface, it's under IP configurations. to give you a picture diagram of what that looks like, let me show you. So if I do, let's move this to the side. What that actually looks like in essence is this, is I have my virtual machine. My virtual machine has a network interface. The network interface has an IP configuration, and the IP configuration has the application security group tag. So, because that's important in case you have multiple IP configurations on your interface, right? So, but the thing is, for each IP configuration, you can have a maximum of 10 application security group tags associated with that. If you want more than that, you can raise a support case with Microsoft, and they can extend that to 20 for you. So just be aware of that as you're thinking about some of the limitations as to how you can use this. To me, the biggest one still is around I cannot use this beyond a single VNet. That's the biggest one to me so far. The other limitation that we have is how many application security groups can we have in our Azure subscription? What are we limited to? So we're limited to 200 for each region. So what that means is if I have my Azure subscription, in the West US region, I can have 200 application security groups, East US 200, East Asia 200. So I can have 200 application security groups per region, which to me, like for many people, that'll be okay. If you wanted to, you can raise a support call with Microsoft. They will extend that to 500 for you. To just be aware of that. And then finally, let's talk about the number of rules that we can have. So now I have my network security group here, and I'm using my application groups in this network security group. By default, I can only use 50 application security groups in a network security group. So within this network security group, I can only use 50 application security groups within the rules. If I wanted to, I could raise a support case with Microsoft and they can extend that to 100. So those are the main limitations. Number one, does not extend beyond a VNet, which my guess would be at some time, at some point in the future, they will extend support for that, but not at the moment. Number two is the amount that you can have per IP configuration of a network interface. You can have default of 10, you can extend it to 20 if you raise a call with Microsoft. In terms of the number of network security groups that you can have in your subscription is 200 per region. Um, so for every region that you have, you can have 200. In terms of how many network security groups, how many application security group that you can use within a network security group rule, you can use a maximum of 50. If you need more than that, you can raise a call with Microsoft. They can extend that to 100 for you. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So finally, I think the final thing is just when talking about architectural guidance, just keep those limitations in mind. If you try like I've done, so I'll bring up some of my notes here. If you try to, oh, by the way, there's a bunch of other things that I did not mention because of time, but I won't be mentioning that, is if you want to deploy using Azure Ham template, by the way, this is the resource objects that you're using will be this. So let's expand this. If you look at the type is Microsoft.network application security group, and just specify the parameter, which is the name and the resource group location, or the location that you want to put it in. So that's the way. If you want to deploy it using an Azure Ham template, that's how you deploy it using an Azure Ham template. Can you modify an existing machine and tag it with in an application security group? Yes, you can do that. So you have to do that though using from the IP configuration itself. So associate ASG with Nick. If I scroll down, so you can use this set of command essentially to associate it. So I think I have the command up here. Let's go when I was making the notes for this. By the way, I think I'll share this note also, probably put that on my blog somewhere so you can access that. Yeah, okay, this is how you do it. So you can modify ESG configuration of an existing NIC. So you can replace it, you can add a second one. You just have to get the network interface configuration first of all, and then you can modify that. So you have to modify the IP configurations of that network interface. So that's how you do that. So what else did I want to talk about? I think that's mainly it. So you can deploy it using Azure CLI. Yeah, okay. So the situation that I talked about where it's limited to only a single virtual network. If you try to extend it beyond a single virtual network, this is the type of error message that you get. You get an error message that says, you can see, I'm not sure if that error message is very clear. Let me try to make that bigger. It seems like it's going smaller. So let's reset that. Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is clear enough, but what that says is network security group has application security group for multiple virtual networks. So it's going to throw you that error message if you try to use it across virtual networks, like what I try to do. So that's the error message that you get. You get something similar to this. What about this other one? So you get, if you still try to modify, try different ways to try to use it across virtual network. The other error message that I get is let's see, um, it said management AS servers, which is the application security group, is already in virtual network, this virtual network, and the IP configuration are in a different virtual network. In other words, you can only use them within a virtual network. Just be aware of that in case you try to use that. So I think that brings us, okay, yeah. So Femi says, so does it suffice to say that this is independent on the native NSG limitation? So Femi, I don't understand the question. So which NSG limitation are you talking about? Oh, okay, I already answered your question, Rohit. Rohit said, does this work when we do VNet peering? No. So if you try to use it with VNet peering and use it across multiple virtual network, the error message that you get is the one that I showed earlier, which is this one. So but at the moment, it's only limited to one. So which is kind of like, not a cool thing. So that's a really big limitation for me. So, but just be aware of that in case whenever you're talking about design and architecture with people and you're like, yeah, we can just simplify everything using network security, so using application security group. Remember to ask them a question. By the way, do you use multiple virtual networks? Okay, so Femi's question was, I was referring to the 10 ASG limitation per virtual network. Yeah, so that's independent. So that's complete. So that's right, Femi. So that's completely independent. So this application security group is a tag that you put on IP configuration. So this one is independent of the limitations of the network security group itself. Yeah, but you can have up to 10. To me, the coolest thing regarding this is the one that I shared in this particular one is the way that this can help. Let's go to swap that. Is the way that this can help to quarantine. So you can have at the top of that a network role that uses application security group. Even if you're not using this for anything else, you can start using this for this now. To have that rule at the top of your list to say block anything that I tag with quarantine VM, right? And then if a security incident happens and you want to isolate a machine, you don't need to be running around changing IP addresses, getting all this stuff. Just get that machine, tag it with quarantine VMs, instantly loses communication. So that's like, to me, that's like one of the big things with this, is the way that it simplifies isolating machines during security incidents. So that's a really big one for me. So any other question? If there's no other question, I think that's probably it for today. So I think I'll do another deep dive series next week. This time I'll be talking about the new Azure standard load balancers. So that will also be cool. So we won't be spending 2 hours and boring ourselves and stuff. We'll just go straight to the point, talk about. So usually whenever I'm doing deep dive series, I want to cover things as holistically as possible. I want to cover implementation and configuration. I want to cover limitations. I want to cover issues of scalability, security, um, automation, if possible, cost, and then compliance. So I want to cover things from all these different angles. So with this one, by the way, there's no cost associated with application security group. It's part of network security group, so there's no cost associated with that. Okay, if there's no other question, thanks very much for joining today. The recordings will be posted online if you guys want to review the slides, the notes that I just showed you, and the script that I used as what. Yeah, sure. Yes, you will. So the complete video recording will be on YouTube, and I'll post links of. So by the way, if you don't have me, so just if you want me to send it directly to your email once I've packaged everything together, um, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is reach out to me on LinkedIn or reach out to me on Twitter. My Twitter is at Ashegunlolu, which is at ASGUNLOLU. So just send me a private message either on Twitter, reach out to me on LinkedIn. So that's my LinkedIn address there. So LinkedIn, I'll post it in the chat window so you can copy it from there. Ah, okay, yeah, Femi York. No,